Studying in college and in university is so tough, especially since there's just so much information to remember and so little time to actually cram it all in. You have to remember everything, absolutely everything, from the most minute detail to how it links with every other minute detail that is rattling around in your head. You have to know how they relate, how to put them together, how to apply these things to other bigger problems. And you have to be able to show and demonstrate that knowledge to your professor in whatever way they choose to test you on it at the end of the semester, whether it is exams where you need to have the momentary spontaneous recall in the instant, to assignments where you might be able to reference information, but you really have to have a solid grasp on the core concepts in order to put it all together. Mental associations are what help you to keep all of this information retained, sorted, and able to be applied to a broader range of ideas and concepts. Today, I'm talking about mental associations. If you've ever watched a handful of my videos, or if you've checked out my website and went through any of the articles there, you know that mental associations is something that I talk about time and time again. And it seems that I really drill this in, but you would be surprised at just how important they are. So that's what we're going to get into today. But first, I'm Terrell, and this is Absolutely Studying. I bootstrapped my way through university while juggling a full-time job and a family. It was tough, but now I want to pay it forward. I want to supply you with all of the resources and support you need to flourish in your academic career. Today, we are talking about mental associations, if you did not get the hint from the first rambling. And hopefully by the end of today's episode, you'll have a full understanding of not only what exactly mental associations are, but also how to strengthen them, how to use them for your advantage, and most importantly, how they can help you trigger recall faster and easier to really help you to get the most out of your study time. So, what are mental associations? Basically, I want to paint a picture for you. Imagine your brain, and your brain is where you store all of the information that you encounter all throughout the day. Everything that you encounter, you just store it in there. This part you already know. But now, when you're going to retrieve that information, imagine a child's toy box. There's just a whole bunch of random things dumped inside this toy box. You open it and you need to find something very specific. So you start sifting through. The smaller items, likely, especially when you're not using them over and over again, they kind of work their way to the bottom every single time the toy box is sifted through or sorted through or jumbled. So those facts just fall away to the bottom. The same thing happens with information that you don't use very often. It kind of falls away to the bottom, especially when it's small and a singular piece of information that does not cling well with others. As you're digging through this toy box and pulling out all of these other facts, it's going to be harder and harder. And it's going to take longer and longer to find what you're looking for. Those little tidbits of information that are falling to the bottom are all the things that you have to learn in your classes. If you don't have something strong anchoring them to other information, making a big clump of information to bulk it up, it's going to be harder and harder to find. That's what a mental association is. A mental association takes that little piece of information and anchors it to more and more pieces, connecting them and turning them into a great big clump of intertwined doll parts, per se. Now, when you pull one piece of related information, it's going to cling to everything else that's related to it and bring that whole bundle up to the top. That's going to help you to be able to find the information better, because now it's not a thimble laying on the bottom of the toy bin, now it's attached to a whole tapestry of different toys. So that's what a mental association is. That is helping us associate different facts all together so that if we need to remember one fact, there is a lot of information that's attached to it that can trigger it, and you can follow those leads to the specific information you want. Now, in your brain, this doesn't happen like digging through a toy box. This happens instantaneously. So when you find a piece of information as you're trying to recall, as you're reading the question, it's going to trigger and at lightning speed, take your brain to that piece of information. Sometimes if the mental association isn't strong, you might have to sit there and think on it for a couple of minutes. But the triggering that recall is going to be much more efficient the more links you have to it. So that was a huge, long explanation for mental associations. I hope I made that clear. If I did not, if I lost you, make sure to leave a comment down below in the description and I can try and maybe explain it again. Right now, I'm going to give you some ways to really help with those mental associations, because being able to build those in new, exciting, different ways is really what the study session is about. You can spend hours reading and not actually be able to retain the information. And at test time, you're just staring a blank and you're sitting there thinking, I have literally spent 12 hours studying this information. Why can't I remember any of it? And it's because you did not build strong mental associations. So let's get into the first one. One of the easiest ways to start creating mental associations is to simply rephrase complex concepts into everyday language. So basically what that means is if you are reading through your textbook, you are reading a lot of technical jargon. There's a lot of terminology, a lot of official vocabulary and stuff like that. Now, while you might understand what those words mean, they're not something you might necessarily use in everyday language. Now, while using terminology is great and it is encouraged so that you do get used to those words, it's also helpful to rephrase those concepts into language that you would use every single day. So let's say you are trying to explain one of these concepts to someone in kindergarten. You obviously wouldn't use the terminology, you would explain it. Now, it might take a lot longer to write that out. It might take 3 or 4 sentences or even, 2 or 3 paragraphs to explain something rather than using the terminology and making it shorthand. But if you can put it in those simple terms, in language that you use every day, that you don't have to even think about what the terminology means, then that just shows that you could explain it to someone else that has no background information and that you understand it. Another really great way to create mental associations, especially if you are a very visual learner like me, is to create a visual image for the piece of information that you need to know. So that could be a diagram, that could be a doodle, anything that triggers what it is. So if it is a process or if it is an action potential, for example, then drawing a diagram and showing, mapping out and making landmarks of everything you need to know and where it goes and what happens in the process that it happens in, it's going to really help you to be able to close your eyes and visualize it during test time. That way, you don't just have the words in your mind and even the explanation that you wrote in the previous step, that you have a solid, concrete visual map of what's happening and why each step is important. Another really interesting way to create mental associations is to have comparison charts. So comparison charts can let you show the similarities and the differences between 2 related concepts. So for example, let's go back to the action potential. If you are talking about the difference between an action potential and the process that happens in an action potential when it sparks and sends an electrical signal, and compare that to the process of the chemical signals being sent, or even when a muscle contracts, the chemical processes that happen when a muscle contracts, or any other concept that you already understand really well. Actually go through and compare each of the steps, each of the processes, and show which ones are similar, which ones are different, and how they are different. That is really layering that understanding and solidifying it and relating it to something that you already know well, hopefully, or two concepts that you hope to know better. Comparison charts are a little bit labor intensive, but the amount of research and thought that goes into it can really, really deepen those mental associations and really, really help you at test time. Because now, when you are actually explaining and going through and showing the professor on your exam an explanation of how to answer your question, you can then also relate it to a different abstract concept and show him that you have expanded your understanding, not only of understanding the process of what's happening, but you can actually generalize that process and compare it to other ones, which is really the hallmark of understanding, that you can generalize something very specific to a broader range of concepts. One way to test the speed and accuracy of the mental associations you've already built are flashcards. You can do them at high speed, you can do them slowly, you can shuffle them and do them in any order. They're really great. You can do them on the go, you can do them at home, you can fit them in to a long 30-minute study period, or you can fit them into a 5-minute quick session. Flashcards really do help trigger recall specifically. So if you feel like you have a really good understanding of the information, but you're not sure of how fast you can recall it, using flashcards really helps, because again, you can sit there and you can just flip through them and trigger and practice recalling the information over and over and over again until it's second nature. One thing that I really love doing in my notes, in anything that I write, whether it's my class notes, my homework notes, any diagram, is color coding. I like to color code things because that adds another layer of mental association. And I immediately trigger a color to a process or a general idea of facts. So if I see pink in my textbook, in my notebook, in my binder, anywhere, it automatically makes me think of terminology. If I see green, I immediately think of people's names. If I see orange, I immediately think of a theory or a hypothesis. And that helps me to sort information. It helps me to know what kind of information I'm either getting ready to take in or I'm going to be asking myself. And that helps me set that up. So I do color code all of my notes. I do color code my flashcards. If I want to only do vocabulary, or if I only want to recall a certain type of information, it makes it much easier. It also helps me to test myself straight out of the textbook. So I can just look for pink, see a word and just read that one word, and then try and think of what the name is or what the definition is, and then read it and test myself right there. This is really great when you are cramped for time. That way I can go through working on my reading strategy, and if I don't get to writing out my notes, it doesn't matter. I can test myself right out of the textbook. Or if I have a friend testing me, I can have them going through my textbook and seeing what kind of information. So if they go through, they can immediately see the highlighted information is the important information, and then they can test me on it. The color coding portion, when I color code everything, is part of my reading strategy. Reading strategies are so important. They really make up the bulk of my focused study sessions. I go through and I have I think it's like 10-step reading process, from skimming all the way to finishing finalized, stylized, gorgeous notes. But there are a ton of steps in between, and every step is intentional and really focuses on one part of creating mental associations and helping to retain the information better and more efficiently. Color coding my textbook and my notes are part of the steps. I do them separately. And I do go into detail on how to create a reading strategy in my digital course. You can check it out on my website. It's at your own pace. And we go through step by step on how to create a reading strategy. If you are at all interested, I'll put a link in the description below. For some classes, there is a ton you have to remember. I know anatomy was one of those classes for me. And you have to remember so many different bones and muscles, and that is very intimidating. Using acronyms is so helpful, so helpful, because you can make up something that's silly or funny, or there are a ton of them out there that are already made if you want to just memorize those, but you can also make something that is personal to you that will help you. You can put these on flashcards and they will help you by making up a word or a sentence that uses the first letter of each bone, for example. Let's do an example. So one example of an acronym, for example, is BEDMAS or PEDMAS. So that is the parentheses or brackets, exponents, division, multiplication, addition, subtraction. Everybody learned that in grade 4 math. And then there are also mnemonics. So those are the sentence ones. So for example, your arm bones, there are a ton of mnemonics for your arm bones. So in your arm, you have your ulna, you have your radius, and you have your humerus. So for that, you can say ultra red hair or usually really hard. The first letter of each word corresponds with the first letter of each bone. So that will really help you to trigger which bones actually belong in the arm: ulna, radius, humerus. So at the end of the day, the single best way to really solidify these mental associations is to test yourself. So just make sure that you are testing yourself regularly. Test yourself with flashcards, test yourself in your notes. Create practice exams and practice tests. I have a template in my study planner. It's free. I'll put a link in the description below. You can just create practice exams and use them as you go along. Try testing yourself at least once every couple of weeks, and especially as you are nearing a big exam, every week at least. That's going to help you to really help to quicken the speed of your recall. It's going to help you to really hone in and focus and realize and notice what you're getting wrong, what you're struggling with all the time. And as you're testing yourself, write those things down. Write down on the confidence tracker in that same study planner what you're really confident at and what you're struggling with. And then focus on the things that you're struggling with. And you can lay off the confident ones a little bit. Still check them out occasionally, but you can really focus on what you're struggling with. That way, as you get closer and closer and closer to the exam, your confidence in knowing what you know and being comfortable under these test conditions really starts to come up, and you're going to start feeling good about your ability to really excel at this test and do things right. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments or pop over and visit me on Instagram at absolutelystudying.com. I love to field your questions, and I am always in and around interacting. If you need any other study resources, check out my website, www.absolutelystudying.com. I have a ton of free resources and articles to help you with the study struggle. Finally, like this video and subscribe to my channel. I put out new videos every week, and they are always about study tips, organizational hacks, and homework helps to help you with the study struggle. And until next time, I hope you have an amazing adventure.